Um. It's the morning prayers as usual. And if you don't have this, could somebody, if you need me to put it in the chat, would somebody say so now?
What the
I
prayer
can put
sheet?
PDF in the chat, but I need to know that I need to do that. If not, we're good, okay. We are here to amplify our study and practice of this path, which has the goal of removing all of our negative mental habits that have been accumulated for countless lifetimes. So we're on a path to remove all the negative ones. And the methods in the path allow us to, at the same time, acquire and develop, cultivate the positive habits. And in summary, what they say is that we are meant to eliminate our harming behaviors of mind, mental behaviors, speech behaviors, and physical body behaviors. We're meant to eliminate those. And we're meant to then, wherever possible, be of assistance to uplift other sentient beings in whatever realm we find ourselves. So that's two aspects of what our goal is. And as we start to get ready to say the prayers, I would like to ask us all to remember that we're part of what's termed the Mahayana lineage. And if you were to imagine now, what does that mean today? So Mahayana practitioners share this aspiration to eliminate all harming behaviors, again, of body, speech, and mind. Good to remember that it's not just, but it's includes the mental behaviors, so mental habits. So all these beings that are currently part of this Mahayana movement throughout all realms and here on the planet, hundreds and thousands, perhaps millions on the planet today practicing this Mahayana path, sharing and abiding in the wish to cease all harming and to, as much as possible, to help. When we get to the four measurables on the prayers, they're sometimes termed the four abodes. And so I have been, and I encourage others to, in their practice, to remember at all times, this is something to abide in always. To not only remember that your motivation 24/7, 365 is this dual idea of not harming and being of benefit. And to appreciate and really kind of be uplifted and increase your happiness to know that you're part of a movement that's not just you, but the people in this class, all the practitioners who are engaged in the similar aspirations, understanding that it's each and every day, constantly in our minds and in our practice, in our behaviors. And to envision that now, as we enter into the prayers, to envision that intention being beamed out throughout the cosmos by practitioners such as yourself. So imagine that you're just surrounded by sentient beings who are in need of your help and assistance, as well as you're surrounded by sentient beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who are totally abiding with you in this intention to be of benefit. And that is constant. That's like the sun shining all the time. Very uplifting. Now, with the visualization of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and our understanding that we are committing, we say the refuge in bodhicitta. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to these teachings today and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by listening to teachings and the other paramitas, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. And picture all those enlightened beings overjoyed that you're joining them in this Buddha field of intention of benefit that is beaming out like the sun shining throughout the cosmos. And the joy and relief and gratitude of the sentient beings who you have the karmic connection with to lead towards enlightenment. And deepening our abode in this attitude of shared altruism, cosmic altruism, we say the four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. And just sort of picture, as we say, this intention, not only from you and us, but right now on this planet and in other realms, beings are sharing this exact aspiration, intention, and motivation. And it's all the time shining and beaming forth throughout the cosmos. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and us and all the sentient beings, everybody is so overjoyed that this aspiration is committed to and shared and alive and real. This is a real thing happening right now, this intention. And now we sort of sharpen our focus on the enlightened beings and the bodhisattvas, the Buddhas and the bodhisattvas, we call the merit field, and we're invoking them, refreshing our gratitude that we would not be able to completely transform ourselves and those that we touch. We couldn't, this transformation would not be possible without guides. And so with our complete gratitude and commitment to following the advice of the guides, the Dharma that is personal advice to us on how to make this transformation possible, with that dedication towards the enlightened beings and the guides and the gurus, we say the seven-limb prayer. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and our lineage are very pleased that we are here to practice and study, and we recognize and are receptive to their guidance. And then, that sort of as a celebration of Thanksgiving, we'll do the mandala offering, where we make the ultimate gift. Through this visualization, what we are doing is committing to the day by day work of our mind, of our speech, and our body. Through those actions, that's how we create this purified universe. And so this mandala offering is what we are striving to create all the time through our practice. This formula is a particular poetic view, but imagine just purified, marvelous, totally creative, happy, dazzling universe. And we'll say it in English: this ground, anointed by perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all beings enjoy this pure land. And imagine sentient beings everywhere abiding in such a wonderful, marvelous abode that you are creating every moment with your actions of body, speech, and mind. And this is your gift that we offer, and we ask the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to accept this imagined offering that we're working towards by saying the Sanskrit, Idam Guru Ratnam Mandalakam Niryatayami. Please accept this imagined mandala. All right, over to you.
Okay. So as I have said before, as like an adjunct course of study to go along with and support Nagarjuna's precious Garland, we are now at the beginning of each session, we are investigating the Buddhist model of the mind. And we're going to take, this is based on, well, it's based on the Dharma itself, but it's specifically, I'm using a text by Khentrul Rinpoche. And there's a link to this text in all of the study guides at the very beginning. Because he's so very clear, and he's very methodical in his step-by-step presentation of the model of the mind, and then we'll take it all the way through all of the stages of meditation. So throughout this, it's almost like a course that he presents. So throughout this course, he has meditative reflections that go along with the information he's presenting, which is why I find this so valuable and helpful. So we're going to do a review of what we talked about last time, which was what is the mind, and then we'll go on to the next phase of this model of the mind. So it's really obvious to everybody that we all want to be happy and we don't want to suffer, and you could even posit that those wishes motivate all of our behavior, if you think about it. I mean, an argument could be made for that. So when we recognize that our experiences of happiness and suffering only occur at the level of conscious experience. In other words, they only occur at the level of either the physical sense consciousnesses, the awarenesses of the physical senses, or the mental sense consciousness. That's where we experience happiness and suffering. It's just that's just a fact. So when we understand that our happiness and suffering only occurs at the level of consciousness, then it becomes incredibly important for us to understand what consciousness is, to really understand it and know what it is. So this is what the Buddhist study of the mind, of consciousness, is all about. Compared to a very robust meditative science that was developed, science of consciousness that was developed over the centuries first through Hinduism, Hindu yogis, and then in India, and then Buddhist yogis in India, and then it was further developed by Tibetan yogis in Tibet, this Buddhist meditation. A very robust science of the mind developed. Western scientific investigation is actually quite new to the field, and it concentrates mainly on the neuroscience of consciousness. So modern neuroscience has attempted to explain consciousness by focusing on the neural correlates of consciousness that occur in the brain. This is necessarily an objective approach aimed at bridging the gulf between consciousness and the brain. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is really like a journal, quote, this is what it says: "A challenge for an objective science of consciousness is to dissect an essentially subjective phenomenon, consciousness. As investigators cannot experience another subject's conscious states, they rely on the subject's observable behavior to track consciousness. Priority is given to a subject's introspective reports, as these express the subject's take on her or his experience. Introspection, thus, provides a fundamental way, perhaps the fundamental way, to track consciousness." So that is taken from that's a quote from the summer 2024 edition of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And it suggests that consciousness is a subjective phenomenon, which Buddhism completely agrees with, and that the fundamental way to track consciousness is through introspection. Of course, introspection is a looking inward. Specifically, it's the process of self-examination or inspection of one's own thoughts and feelings. It is the cognition which the mind has of its own actions and states. That's what introspection is. This is precisely the approach of the great yogic meditators of the past, such as Shakyamuni Buddha. Through working with the mind and in contemplation and introspection, the Buddha was able to completely transform the way he related to the world. So one way to approach this is to just take the Buddhist model of the mind as a hypothesis. Venerable Robina says this all the time. She says it's very helpful for Westerners to approach the Buddha's view of the mind as a hypothesis, that is, as an explanation of the mind that is proposed for the sake of investigation and testing. It's not just to take it on faith. And of all people, the Buddha himself said this. He said he didn't ask his followers to believe him. In fact, the Buddha clearly stated his words must be examined and they must be tested in a similar way to that one would analyze any scientific theory. And you have to test it out, you have to examine it and test it out first. So here's what the Buddha actually says, and this comes from the Gana Vyuha Sutra, the Sutra of the Dense Array, whatever that means. He said, "O bhikshus and the wise, just as a goldsmith tests his gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it, so you must examine my words and then accept them, but not merely out of reverence, not of reverence for the Buddha or faith in the Buddha or anything like that. We have to actually test it for ourselves, like any hypothesis." In Buddhism, the words mind and consciousness are synonymous. They stand for the same thing. According to Buddhist psychology, the mind is non-physical in nature. The mind is not the physical brain. It is not made of particles. It doesn't exist within a specific spatial or temporal location. The great yogic meditators have characterized it as being clear and aware. Sometimes they'll say clear and knowing, but I really like aware, clear and aware. That the mind or the consciousness gives rise to appearances in a similar way that a clear mirror reflects what is in front of it. But unlike a mirror, the mind or the consciousness has the additional property of being aware of what it is reflecting. The non-physical mind or consciousness is intimately associated with the physical brain and body. These two distinct types of phenomena are capable of influencing each other. The activity within the brain and body influences the appearances which arise in one's consciousness, And the thoughts and ideas which arise in the consciousness can trigger particular physical reactions in the brain and the body. And this is what is examined by neuroscientists. They can examine that there is some correlation going on between the consciousness, and then they can see activity going on in the brain. They see that there is a connection. According to the Buddhist model, the body and the mind are like two spheres of activity that can mutually influence one another and do influence one another. Buddhism says, however, that it's only the mind that can know itself. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has stated that consciousness, the mind, is a subjective phenomenon, just as the way in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy said, it's essentially a subjective phenomenon. This is what His Holiness says. Consciousness is a subjective phenomenon. Khentrul Rinpoche posits that if we accept consciousness as being both subjective and non-physical, then we must also accept that a non-conscious, objective phenomenon made of material particles, such as a book or a chair or a machine, is incapable of detecting something that is conscious, subjective, and non-physical. Let me say that again. Objective phenomenon made of material particles, such as a book, a chair, or a machine, they are incapable of detecting something that is conscious, subjective, and non-physical, not made of particles. There is a common belief that everything which exists must be detectable through physical measurements, and that until it is measured, it can't be proven to exist. Buddhism would say the idea that a material, non-conscious means of objective measurement could accurately ascertain and understand something that is essentially non-material, conscious, and subjective is a misconception. It's a mistaken idea. A non-conscious measuring device made of material particles can objectively detect fluctuations of subtle energy or shifts in quantum fields. But Khentrul Rinpoche says it will never be able to directly detect the corresponding awarenesses and mental images that arise in the subjective conscious experience of the mind. This is why in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, that particular section that I quoted, that they are relying on the subject who they are testing to sort of let them know, what are you experiencing, what's going on? Because they can't actually detect the experience. They can just see that there's something happening. Currently, with current neuroscientists, we just watched recently the other night, it was Anil Seth and David Chalmers, and they were being interviewed by somebody Green. He's
Green?
who?
No, I guess not David Green.
Michael Green, or so, I don't know. So, but the guy's really good. He's a physicist in his own right. But they were dead set upon not the two neuroscientists, Anil Seth and David Chalmers, would not.
Let me put it this way: neither of them were open to the possibility. Any other possibility than consciousness is generated or created by matter.
By matter. Whereas the moderator, who is a physicist, said, well, what about this idea?
Claudia is suggesting his name is Brian Green.
I think it's Brian Green. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's Brian Green. He's had various shows on Nova and stuff like that. He's very good. But he suggested to them, well, what about the idea that consciousness itself is a fundamental aspect of reality, of of what's going on? And they said, no, we can't prove that.
I just really found the conversation to be
so it just went around in circles.
It was like
it went around in circles, and it was very difficult to come to conclusions. But the two neuroscientists were very hopeful that within maybe the next 20, 30, 50 years, there would be some progress made to show that consciousness arises out of matter, to show that something that is subjective in nature
But
can
again,
arise out of something that is not subjective in
their
nature.
whole premise is that that's just, for them, it's almost as if they're presenting that they know that that is the case, and they're not open to any.
Well, they're using that as their hypothesis.
Right,
They are open
they're
to,
not considering any other possibilities.
if it could be
I
proven,
found it weird.
no, but they both said, if it could be proven in some way, then they would accept that. But here's what the proof is, it can, which I'm just saying, something that is subjective, conscious, and non-physical can only be experienced by something else that is subjective, conscious, and non-physical. It can't be experienced by a piece of paper. It can't be experienced by just particles. And this is why we're taking the Buddhist view on as a hypothesis to see if it can make sense, because what we have to do in order to see if it can make sense is try it out for ourselves. And this involves going through these stages of meditation and experimenting with it. Otherwise it's just a conceptual hypothesis, and we're not actually testing it. So that's basically what I wanted to say. What machines can detect is the correlation between the influences that non-physical phenomena have on the physical world and vice versa. In the end, this leads to the conclusion that the only thing capable of ascertaining a non-physical subjective phenomenon directly is another non-physical subjective phenomenon. In this case, the mind itself, consciousness itself. So realizing this, the great yogic meditators who have preceded us have made skilled and practiced efforts to develop a range of mental techniques for directly observing the mind with the mind, just that. Through engaging with these techniques over a prolonged period, they learned that the mind could be trained and conditioned to reveal specific, desirable qualities. Remember, the whole point is we all want to be happy and nobody wants to suffer. And that was the whole Buddhist point of presenting his findings. His very first teaching was saying, yeah, suffering exists and we don't like it. So what are we going to do about it, is what he was saying. When we look at the scientific and technological developments over the last century in the world here, it's easy to see that our knowledge of the world has grown considerably, like in leaps and bounds, really, compared to a century ago. This didn't happen overnight. It took countless people who dedicated their time and effort to uncover secrets of the physical universe. And in the same way, the great meditators of the past devoted their lives to discovering the true nature of the mind, the true nature of what consciousness is. So now we'll get to this one of their first discoveries, or one of the first observations that they made. What these great meditators observed is that something does not arise from nothing. I know that sounds pretty simple, but it's not. Something does not arise from nothing. Neither can something all of a sudden turn into nothing. Just as in physical energy, there is a principle or law of conservation at work here. Energy is a property that is not created or destroyed, although it can change in its detectable form. Matter and energy can neither be created from nothing nor destroyed to the point of being completely erased from reality. Albert Einstein was the first to mathematically show this with E equals mc squared. Energy and matter is merely transformed and reconfigured, and this is called the law of the conservation of energy. Similarly, the great yogis have observed that the conscious mind can neither be created from nothing nor destroyed to the point of complete obliteration from reality. The mind, they say, is a continuity of consciousness, where each moment of consciousness gives rise to the next one, which then gives rise to the next one, and so on. In any given moment of consciousness, there has to be a moment directly preceding it, which acted as the basis for the next moment of consciousness to arise. This means that a beginning of consciousness cannot be found. There was never any moment where nothing became something, just as in the law of the conservation of energy. I mean, we've discussed this before when we talked about beginningless time, and that if you kept going back, like, well, let's go back to the Big Bang. Well, something caused the Big Bang. It didn't come out of nothing. So you have to say, well, so what is that then? So, the current theory is that everything just sort of gets sucked back into, a state of hibernation, almost very, very, very intense concentrated energy, and then it explodes again. And it's similar to the breath. We can see it. Breathe in, breathe out, and then there's a very brief period where it just sort of doesn't happen, and then you breathe in and breathe out again. It's almost as if everything is this way in the universe. Everything goes through this cyclic process, and consciousness is no different. I think what Buddhism would say, which was similar to what Brian Greene, the physicist moderator, was saying, is, well, why couldn't you posit that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality, the same way that matter is, the same way that energy is? It's a fundamental aspect. But that's just something for us to posit and to test. The fact that there is one moment presently arising is also the basis for the next moment to arise. The sort of experience that arises in the next moment will depend on the conditions of the present moment. That's just really logical. While the next moment will not be exactly the same as the previous one, it will still be a moment of consciousness, and therefore we can never posit an end to consciousness. There will never be a moment where something becomes nothing. In this way, we can say that the mind is a beginningless and endless process of transformation, just like energy and matter is. So now Khenpo Rinpoche talks about what he calls the external wheel of time. He says this process of consciousness is called the external wheel of time. In this context, wheel refers to the endless process of moment-to-moment awareness, a cycle with no beginning, no middle, and no end, while time refers to continual movement and change. You could say it's similar to impermanence, continual movement and change. The constantly shifting appearances in the mind arising from the mutual influence between physical and non-physical phenomena. Again, all of these things are intimately connected. Consciousness, matter, energy, they're all they're connected, and yet they are distinct. They're distinct. This is important for our own experience of happiness and suffering, because understanding this will help us recognize the causal connection between our past, our present, and our future experiences. We can easily see that some experiences that we have are more preferable than others. The ones we like, we call happiness, and the ones that we don't like, they can be called suffering, if you want to just generalize it. By analyzing which conditions give rise to happiness and which conditions give rise to suffering, then we are able to modify our own behavior accordingly to what we want. It's kind of a, you could say it's a very simple process, but because we haven't understood it correctly, we have habituated ourselves to just grasping after what we think we want, thinking that it's going to make us happy, that something out there is going to do it, rather than understand that we ourselves need to create the conditions and causes within our own conscious continuum, conscious and our physical continuum, to have happiness, to experience happiness, and to avoid suffering. This is what the Buddha was talking about. These are why these initial, what we would call ethics, these practices of ethics are all about that. You know, how to generate the causes and conditions so that we can experience something that we would call happiness and avoid something that we would call suffering, because we don't like suffering. So what Buddhism calls training the mind is simply a process of intentionally shaping how our mental continuum develops. So there's a little meditation that Khenpo Rinpoche has now based on this continuity of the mind. But before we go into that, any kind of discussion of what we talked about, the hypothesis of the Buddhist model of the mind, the continuity of the mind, how that relates to generating causes and conditions to avoid suffering and have happiness. Any questions about any of that? Or observations, discussions?
Let me ask about that. So for instance, suppose attachment, suppose you could measure that with chemicals in the brain and certain electrical states, and you could repeat that consistently across different people, and you could induce that also if you created that condition.
You mean induce it chemically?
Well, yeah, chemically, I mean, let's just assume we can do
Okay,
that.
so you would trigger some part of the.
Trigger that, and so
Yeah.
trigger attachment, so you get that sensation of attachment. Just that, that as an example. I mean, a Buddhist could just say, well, that's just a correlation. That's not really the mind you're seeing, whereas a materialist would say, you know, that explains that mind is actually a physical matter.
Well, what it explains is that there's a physical component, there's a connection, but what that detection that you're talking about, the chemicals and all that, they will not give us the experience of attachment.
Well, so suppose, I mean, like, you could get that, suppose you could get that experience. Would then a Buddhist say, okay, it is material, the mind is, or the mind can be measured, it's not just a non-physical thing that you cannot measure? I mean, I think what I'm getting is I think it's really hard to really make that decision one way or the other, because you can always sort of say, well, it is not quite what I would then call as a physical.
Right. According to this any hypothesis, in order for us to fully know this, we have to test out this idea of this meditation, understanding the mind, experiencing the various stages and levels of mind before we can accurately say, oh, it's just physical. But that's not what I would say that the Buddha or the yogis, that's not the conclusion that they came to. So in order for, we could sit here all day and talk about, well, you know, that chemical will induce a particular feeling, but is that actually consciousness itself? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to pipe in on that too. I mean, you've sort of touched on this, but I just happened to be hearing Venerable Robina address this in her way a couple days ago. We don't notice, the way she was talking about it was, we don't notice there is attachment until we have what is a physical sensation. So our heart starts pounding, our solar plexus maybe tightens, our blood pressure goes up.
Yeah.
We don't call it anger, or in this case,
Or
in this
attachment.
case, we'd say attachment. We don't call it, I'm gonna use a stronger word, clinging or grasping or craving. We don't call it that. We don't notice it. We're not in the habit of noticing it, she said, until it reaches, until these physical symptoms come along with it, which, according to what she said, is evidence of the when you're embodied in a physical being, in a physical body, the interplay between this pre-awareness, primordial, I'll say, attachment, and the physical reaction are, you don't normally notice that you have this pervasive tendency towards attachment until something triggers it, and in your positive scenario, you might put an electrode or a drug or whatever. You could, whatever thing, and yes, you could reliably keep triggering attachment through the apparatus of the physical vehicle, which I'm getting too far off the thing, but what she's saying is that is not what we're talking about at the most subtle level. When we're talking about attachment, it's a more deeply rooted belief system in how the universe is supposed to be put together. In other words, we have this subtle idea that the universe should always be appearing to us the way we want it. And that's kind of how the way we want it to be, and that's kind of the starting towards the subtler level. I know I got off, but I hope that I at least conveyed the notion that being able to trigger what we commonly would refer to as, say, anger or attachment through stimulus of either electronic drug or whatever, could be a visual thing. The difference between what we, in our gross awareness, experience as attachment and actual attachment at the subtle level are two different things. So our physical experience of it, oh wow, that's attachment, and actual attachment are said to not be identical.
Yeah.
And I just sort of, it becomes difficult because we're differentiating. Here's an example she used the other day, and it might be somewhat helpful. When we're driving our car down the freeway going 85 miles an hour in Texas, we're not aware of how much skill is being employed moment by moment. We're just driving along, and we've driven so much that we know how to drive, and we're not worried about it. We can chat, we can listen to an audiobook or whatever. It isn't until someone cuts in front of us that we even notice all that we're driving, and it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. That was the example she used. She was using it in a more instructive sense that you need to be sure you know how to drive before you get on the freeway going 85 miles an hour.
Right.
But in any case,
Yeah.
I know you were trying to point towards this, but I had just heard this the other day, and I could see our problem, and this is an issue with the physical sciences, as far as my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, so there's so much I don't know, but what I am roughly familiar with, and essentially, unless our scientific community has developed a tool to measure something, it is impossible for our scientific community to, within their own discipline, to verify that something is or isn't so. And so it becomes this huge limitation. By definition, it's a ginormous limitation, because until you have the apparatus to measure something, never mind until you have even the notion that something is out there to be measured. So it's kind of a very self-limiting. This is what I found so frustrating about these physicists talking. It's like, wow, they're just so stuck in their discipline, in their paradigm, and what is existing. But anyway.
Right. And so this is why I say it's very important for us to be open-minded. Like I said, not gullible, but open-minded, not close-minded about certain kinds of paradigms. because that is not the scientific way, and it really isn't. Despite what sometimes you can see happening with scientists, kind of a very closed mind, and that was very evident in this interview between these two very well-known neuroscientists and this very well-known, I think he's a physicist, but he's also he's a moderator and things like that, Brian Greene. He kept bringing up, but what about the idea that consciousness could possibly be a fundamental aspect of reality? And they were not willing, neither of them actually, were willing to even take that on as a hypothesis until it was proven already. So it just went around in circles, and we found it it wasn't enlightening or helpful. What it basically said is, oh, they just don't know. They're basically saying we don't really know.
I think it's interesting that these yogis claim to have experiences, and there's lots of reading you can do about what it's like to be a yogi, or enough. And they're quite confident that the consciousness operates autonomously, separate from the physical, based on their experience. And the little bit of reading I've done on some of these more esoteric practices, they're working with their body as if it was a tool. They don't identify with the body, but they use the breath, as we all know, and certain yogic practices to trigger certain physical reactions, almost like what Claudia was positing as a potential way to prove something, but they're using it to trigger their consciousness to be able to lift off, if you will,
Yeah,
from the physical apparatus.
When we get into these stages of meditation, we'll see how the incredible subtle and ever more subtle levels of conscious experience that that reveals itself at these very deep and subtle levels of meditation, which we're not even thinking about because we've not experienced them. And so this is why I say it's important, the way Venerable Babina talks about it, take it on as hypothesis, because it's the only way that it will allow us to have the open mind to test it out before making a judgment about it, based on what we know. Here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. I mean, it's vast, and so I guess some humility is in order here. We shouldn't think we know too much, and just really be open to the possibilities that are out there.
Which must be really uncomfortable for somebody, for example, in an academic setting.
All right. I mean, if you're trying to get funding.
Like 3 of you guys are currently, in an academic setting where you are in front of students at every level, at high levels.
Yeah.
Who, there's some expectation or assumption that somehow something.
There also was
it must be very weird to try to feel the imperative to have a definitive position and response to things.
There also was a very subtle level of what would you call it? Competition between the two neuroscientists.
Yeah, that was funny.
And which is, normal. I mean, this is what egos do. Quite normal, quite understandable. So, everybody's defending their position in a way. So, anything else before we go through this meditative exercise by Khenpo Rinpoche on the continuity of the mind?
I have just a general statement that has come to my awareness this week in a more sharply focused way, that all this analytical, intellectual study, for some weird reason, I can begin to appreciate more and more why it is so essential to the development of altruism. It's weird, and I wish I could put it into words now, but I can see what Geshe Drakpa used to always say, that your your compassion, he would say, is not reliable until you have realized emptiness, or in
Wisdom.
more broadly, realize the way things actually exist.
Yeah.
So it feels somewhat, I know sometimes all of us get a little bit bewildered. We're immediately drawn into Buddhism by the idea of universal compassion and altruism and non-harming and all the things that are clearly beneficial to our world. And I know many students have fallen off by the wayside when we get into these wisdom teachings. And all Geshe Rakpa would used to always say was, what will happen is someday in your effort to be altruistic and compassionate, you will misapprehend what's going on and it will be like blown away like dust.
The compassion, yeah.
Your compassion will be. And so it is only through the wisdom wing that we acquire the stability, the actual grounded stability. And so even though it feels like just a bunch of intellectual,
Oh, no, it's completely connected. It's
I'm
completely
just
connected,
saying,
yeah.
for anybody who's wondering about that aspect of this, it's
Okay. All right, sit quietly with your back straight and just adopt a relaxed state of mind. Consider where you are right now. How did you get here? What events led up to this moment? As you identify different actions, consider the thought which motivated those actions. Step back slowly, reconstructing the causal chain of events from this moment all the way back to the moment when you woke up in the morning. Now consider the last week. Select a few moments that made a particular impression on you. Think of both the mental experiences and physical actions that you engaged in. Keep going back as though you were following a trail of breadcrumbs. Look back even further, considering the major events that have occurred over the course of the last year. Consider how each of these events has contributed to this present moment that you are now experiencing. Now look back through your life and identify different moments that you feel were significant to who you are as a person. Consider how these turning points influenced your subsequent decisions. Go into as much detail as you like within the time that you would like to spend. When you are tired of thinking, just rest for a moment. Yeah, I got to use the little finger bell. Whoa, that was interesting. It was like, for me, it was like, you know, when they say when you die, you see your life flash before you. It was kind of like, I was all the way back at, I mean, tiny little kid, and then the whole process of life and where where I'm at.
I could feel the connection.
Yeah, I most definitely could feel the connection and the and the the things that I've consciously decided to carry with me because they're important. One of them being a spiritual. I want to call it a spiritual path, but what it actually is a this desire I've had since I was a kid. And this desire was based on not understanding why things were the way they were with me personally and with my family and friends and everything going on in the world. And this desire to know what is going on has been, it's like a consistent thread through my life, through my relationship with Kavita, through everything. And was interesting to see that. I'm just, sharing because I haven't actually done this yet myself. I was just, stuck it in here because I knew he had it there. Any other observations from anybody? Are you able to see the connection, the almost like the pathway or the thread of our consciousness, of our life, and how our consciousness is actually affecting what we do?
I had a visual image, which I've mentioned before, but it came really strongly. You know how when you look at a fountain or a geyser, the water's gushing up and you see the froth at the top of the geyser? I felt like my whole life, that was the way the continuity, it's all there. Everything that
Oh,
everything that's come before is all that
all part of it.
water column underneath the froth of the present moment.
Oh,
It was kind of an interesting.
yeah. I think I mentioned this, or maybe it was a couple of weeks ago. There was a point in time, our early music group was working on recordings of music from the first century, and it had to do with God and religious, the spiritual life in the Middle East at that time. And so we were studying languages, and I was looking into the etymology of words. And I remember looking up in one of the dictionaries that we had the etymology of the English word God. And it turned out it was something very much like what Kavita just described. It was a fountain. It was like a fountain that was constantly moving, constantly transforming and changing, and ever like an eternal thing, and a fountain. And I thought that was really, really interesting that was the etymology of the word that people now use as God, which was quite actually profound if you think about it. Language to me is extremely interesting. The origins of language, and what the roots mean. I mean, there's a lot there if you look into language. Anyway, anybody else? I know we have a lot to say.
Must be the caffeine.
Yeah, I think well, caffeine, that's part of it. That's that chemical that has triggered triggered this conscious experience.
It's
Okay, so now, we'll leave it for there, and we'll come back to more next week. And the reason I'm doing this very slowly is because it has to be done incrementally. The information gets so dense as we go forward that unless we take it very slowly and digest it, and we'll probably need to discuss more and more as we go along, we will get lost in the weeds of it. So this is why it's just going to take it slowly and have it at the beginning of each session. All right. But maybe we'll take less time next time. So now we go back to Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, where we left off, and we're now at stanza 43. And this is about distinguishing between correct and incorrect views. And here's what 43 says. In brief, the view of nihilism is that effects of actions do not exist. So, in other words, nihilism is, it doesn't matter what you do, what you say, it just, nothing matters. The effects, they don't matter. It's just, that's nihilism. So Nagarjuna says, without merit and leading to a bad state, it is regarded as a wrong view. Nihilism is regarded as a wrong view. And when, we can replace merit with positive potential, because that's really what merit is referring to. So Nagarjuna is saying that this view that no matter what you do, nothing matters, there's nothing you can do about it. He's saying that view has no positive potential within it at all. It's like a dead end. It's going nowhere. And so it's considered a wrong, or it's considered a mistaken view, because it's not helpful. So here's stanza 44. In brief, the view of existence is that effects of actions exist. So any action that you take, whether it's a thought that you have, whether something comes out of your mouth, whether it's an action you take with your body, the effects of that do exist, and what you do does matter. In other words, what you think, what you say, what you do, it matters. It makes a difference. He says that is meritorious. That does have positive potential within it. It also has negative potential, but it has positive potential within it. And it's conducive to happy, what they call transmigrations, a happy continuing existence as you're going forward. And he's saying that is regarded as a right view, or a correct view, that effects of actions do exist and they do matter. So these verses are following up on the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika views. Remember, Vaibhashika and Sautrantika are the two less subtle Theravadan view of schools of Buddhist tenets. So the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika schools, they had an objection that if nirvana doesn't exist inherently, then it doesn't exist at all. Because those schools, that view believes for something to actually exist, it must exist, it must have an independent self-existence. It must exist inherently, exactly the way that it appears to us, exactly the way that we feel we are. And this is the view of the less subtle view. And they accuse the higher view, the highest, the most subtle view, the Prasangikas, they accuse them of being nihilists because the Prasangikas say that nothing exists inherently. There is no such thing as an independent self-existing anything. So they mistake the Prasangika view for being nihilistic. And the Prasangikas say, we're not nihilists. The nihilistic extreme is to stubbornly believe that things like the Four Noble Truths or the Buddha Dharma Sangha or the law of cause and effect and so on are non-existent if they don't inherently self-exist. That's a mistake. To think that those things inherently self-exist is a mistake. If a person holds to that kind of view, a view that doesn't have any positive potential, to say, for instance, if you say something inherently exists the way it appears, that is completely independently self-existent, if you logically take that to its final outcome, it means that that thing cannot actually be affected by anything else or depend on anything else, because once it does that, it no longer independently self-exists. It is dependently taking on various aspects and changing due to that. And what the Prasangikas are saying is that is the way things are, and that has tremendous positive potential in it. If you generate the right causes and conditions and the right dependent arisings for happiness rather than suffering. So there's a huge difference between saying something is something does not inherently self-exist, or saying that something exists in general. You know, to say it doesn't exist unless it's independently self-existent is very different than saying things do exist. They conventionally exist. They exist as dependent co-arisings. They exist. It's not like they're an illusion. It exists. It has effects. We experience those effects. So a realistic view believes that the things like the Four Noble Truths, enlightened beings, karma, samsara, and so on, while they don't exist inherently, they don't have any independent self-existence, they do exist conventionally as dependently co-arising phenomena. Since they exist conventionally, it's possible to give up those destructive causes and conditions that continually generate the cycle of suffering and begin practicing those beneficial causes and conditions that will generate love and compassion and wisdom, qualities that are to be adopted on the path to liberation from suffering. The view that karma and its results exist holds huge positive potential, and it will lead to higher rebirth. According to the sutras, this is the worldly right view. That's the correct view. Let me see where we're at. All right, good. Now we go on to any questions about that? That really ties in with what we were talking about the previous month or so with conventional existence. You know, what is conventional existence? What is ultimate existence? How do the two remember, conventional existence is, what do they say? Two isolates, one entity. So like within this piece of paper conventionally
One entity,
exists.
two isolates.
Or one entity, two
We're
isolates.
thinking.
Yeah. This conventionally exists, which means it is a dependent arising. And we don't even have to go into that. You can clearly see that this is a dependent arising on many, 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 many levels. What that means is that it is completely empty of any independent self-existence. So this is where the wisdom comes in. And we have to carry that through into everything and understand that is the case with everything. The problem that we have, and I mean, Kavita and I still constantly are doing this. We are so habituated to for instance, like seeing the actions of my nephew as inherently existing, and what's wrong with him? Why can't he change? It just creates disturbances. Because we are unable to let go and see our own part in how we say view someone else, how we view their actions. This is coming from us. And if we, project onto them all of these things that we're saying, they are this way and I don't like it, and we do it all the time, then we are not realizing the part that we're playing in that. We can change our view. We can change the way we think of others. It can be done. We have to want to do it. We have to see the value in it. We have to see that by doing so and adopting a correct view of how things exist, it's going to lessen our suffering. It's going to lessen our anger, lessen our fear, lessen our sense of distance from one another. But it requires practicing and studying the wisdom wing. It really, really does. We all want to be compassionate. We all want love. We all want those things. But as Kavita was saying, without, and as all of our teachers have said, without a full understanding first, a conceptual understanding of the wisdom aspect of what Buddhism is talking about, that compassion is only going to go so far. It'll only work for those who we feel are victims, or who feel they deserve our compassion, they deserve our love. We're unable to make the connection that the perpetrators, the bad guys, also deserve our love. They deserve our compassion. It's very difficult for us to see this if we don't understand the wisdom wing properly. All right, going to stanza 45. Because existence and non-existence are extinguished by wisdom, there is a passage beyond meritorious and ill deeds. Because existence and non-existence are extinguished by wisdom, there is a passage beyond meritorious and ill deeds. This, say the excellent, is liberation from bad transmigrations, or bad, continuing rebirths, or continuing existence in reality, whatever, and happy transmigrations. So in one sense, grasping at existence is grasping, they're talking about grasping at inherent existence, that these things really exist the way they appear, the way I think about them, that's how they are. And grasping at non-existence would be saying that nothing matters, nothing exists, it's just all an illusion, So those are both extinguished by wisdom. It's the wisdom teachings and the understanding of how actually things exist, how they function. Here the commentator is saying, grasping at inherent existence is extinguished in both nirvanas with remainder and without remainder. Remember, we talked about this. These two types of nirvana can be posited in different ways. The general way that is acceptable to all Buddhist tenet systems are the nirvanas with and without remainder, posited by the lower schools, by Bhashaka and Sautrantika, that we've discussed before. And basically, I'll go over it again quickly. Nirvana means cessation. It means that, your suffering is over, you're finished, it's ceased. So with the lower schools, the nirvana with remainder is when you've had these like the hearers and the solitary realizers have a direct realization of emptiness, and then they remove their afflictive obscurations, but they have achieved nirvana, but they're still alive, they're still in their body, So they call that is called nirvana with remainder, because their body is remaining, and their body is still subject to, samsaric conditions, and, they still have things that could trigger the afflictions, or they see afflictions around them. So when they die, that's called nirvana without remainder. And when they die, these arhats, these solitary realizers and pratyeka Buddhas who have gone all the way. When they die, then it's complete, their existence is extinguished. It's over. The consciousness is
They
extinguished.
say that.
Their existence is,
It is
this is
not
what they
actually-
say.
That's
This is,
not what happens. That
this is what they say. So this is a nirvana with remainder and without remainder, that all the Buddhist tenets, acknowledge that somebody says this. The higher ones say, yeah, we acknowledge that this is what the lower schools think. And the lower schools say, yeah, we acknowledge this is what's going on. And as I mentioned before, Kavita and I both have met Theravada Buddhists, current ones, who say the exact same thing. They say, oh yeah, what escape from all of this, liberation from the suffering of the world is extinction. You go through all these levels and then you're out, gone, kaput forever. And that's one view of how you can be rid of suffering, is just not experience anything at all. And that is not the view that the higher schools are talking about. So I'll go to the higher view. The Prasangika school has a unique way of positing these two nirvanas, or these two cessations. When hearer or solitary realizer arhats are in the state of non-conceptual meditative equipoise on emptiness, only emptiness appears to them. There is no appearance of inherent existence at all, and therefore there is no grasping at inherent existence. The Prasangikas call this nirvana without remainder. And what the without remainder is referring to is the lack of any remaining appearance of inherent existence when you're in this non-conceptual state of meditative equipoise, having a realization of emptiness. After those arhats have arisen from meditative equipoise on emptiness, when they go about their daily activities and do other types of meditation, although phenomena appear inherently existent to them, similar to the way it all appears to us, they still don't grasp at phenomena as existing inherently. This is called nirvana with remainder by the Prasangikas. Here, with remainder is referring to the appearance of inherent existence that still remains, even though it's not grasped at, because one has had a direct realization. So things still appear the way they do to us, yet through having the direct realization of emptiness, we know, we've had the direct realization that they actually don't exist the way they appear. And that is called nirvana with remainder by the Prasangikas.
So same terminology.
But
two different schools of philosophy.
Right.
And they mean completely different
They
things.
mean very different things. Very
This
different
happens
things.
throughout this study of these schools of philosophy.
Right.
They use the same terms, meaning different things.
Which is why it can get
in English.
it can get very confusing. It can get very confusing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah.
In stanza 45, the phrase that says it's extinguished by wisdom. So I'll read it again. Because existence and non-existence are extinguished by wisdom. In stanza 45, that extinguished by wisdom means that meditation done in conjunction with wisdom, directly realizing emptiness, extinguishes the mistaken views of inherent existence and non-existence. In this meditative state, one ceases grasping phenomena to be either inherently existent or conventionally non-existent. Like, well, this is just an illusion, it's a dependent arising, it doesn't actually exist, it's all like an illusion. You hear people say that. And they say that a direct realization of emptiness will extinguish that view, because that's not actually the case. Things do conventionally exist. They have an effect. It's really important to remember that.
You said last week that conventional existence is the only kind of existence there.
That's true. I mean, there is no ultimate existence. Ultimate existence would mean non-existence, really. And that's not the case. The only existence there is conventional existence. A Buddha exists conventionally, just as hell being exists conventionally. Yeah. Even at the time of nirvana with remainder, when they're walking around and everything looks inherently existent, but they know it's not. When our hearts are not meditating on emptiness and phenomena appear inherently existing, grasping at inherent existence is no longer in their continuum of awareness. So it has been extinguished. It has been extinguished. By directly realizing emptiness and repeatedly meditating on emptiness, grasping at inherent existence is extinguished, and the constructive and destructive actions that we take, or karmas that we engage in that are motivated by grasping, are extinguished. New karmas that cause rebirth in cyclic existence are no longer generated, and those that were previously generated cannot ripen into new high or low rebirths in cyclic existence. So in other words, once you've extinguished this grasping at inherent existence, you may have had the karma to be reborn in a god realm or something like that. That will not occur anymore. You will not have the karma to be caught up in cyclic existence, because cyclic existence by its nature is about grasping at inherent existence. It's about grasping at me. It's about grasping at I as existing as an independent, self-existent being. And because of that view, that I exist independently, then what the consciousness does is it projects that view out onto everything, which is what we have done, which is what, according to Buddhism, this is what has happened. And they don't give a start moment to this. They don't give a beginning moment to this. They just say beginninglessly, this is what has occurred. There's been a mistake made in the way we perceive first ourself as being some kind of independent, self-existing thing. Then we go, anything that's mine, holy cow, my body, my aggregates, my consciousness, my everything, this is mine. We become very attached to that. Then, because we believe that, we project that out onto everything else. And thus the world that appears to us has appeared for that reason, in that way. And this is what becomes extinguished with the direct realization of emptiness and the removal of all the afflictive and cognitive obscurations. It's going beyond just being an arhat. It's going all the way to enlightenment. So let's go. Freedom from the causes and effects of absolutism and nihilism. And of course, absolutism is saying things absolutely exist the way they appear. Absolutely, this is real, that's real, I'm real, you're real, truly existing as these separate things. And nihilism is nothing really exists, so it doesn't really matter. Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. What the hell, you know? So stanza 46 says, seeing production as caused, one passes beyond non-existence. And then it says, seeing cessation as caused, one also does not assert existence. So here's what the commentator says. By following the Madhyamaka path of the middle way, this is the highest view of the tenets. Prasangikas are free from the two extremes of non-existence and existence, or you could say nihilism and absolutism. In stanza 46, the phrase seeing production as caused, it says, seeing production as caused, one passes beyond non-existence. That seeing production as caused means that cyclic existence has causes. It just didn't arise out of nothing. Prasangikas know through logical, reliable means of cognizing that the arising of suffering, what the Buddha called dukkha, it has a cause, which is grasping at inherent self-existence. That is how suffering arises, according to the Buddha. This grasping at inherent existence, which I said begins with, me and then extends out to everything. True cessation or nirvana, nirvana, remember, means cessation, occurs due to the power of meditating on the true path, the correct pathways of consciousness, the path that realizes that inherently existent appearances are not an absolute objective reality. This is the revelation that occurs with a direct realization of emptiness, the actual nature of reality. That's what a direct realization of emptiness is referring to. In this way, Prasangikas also avoid the extreme of inherent existence and absolutism. So now, cessation or nirvana does not have a cause in the same way that cyclic existence does, because cessation is permanent. We talked about this before. Cessation is what they call a non-affirming negative. It is simply an absence of something. And an absence of something that never was there in the first place. So it's basically, it's not really caused, it's sort of a release, a letting go of something that never actually existed. So cessation doesn't have a cause in the same way cyclic existence does, because cessation is permanent. It's not a thing. Only things are impermanent. Cessation is actually not a thing. It's just a cessation. What does Nagarjuna mean then when he says in stanza 46, he says, seeing cessation has a cause, one also does not exert existence. Existence in this context refers to the extreme of inherent existence or absolutism, that things actually truly exist the way they appear to us. Nirvana, which is a permanent cessation, is said to have a cause in name only because it occurs in the consciousness due to the power of meditating on the unmistaken path of consciousness, the wisdom realizing emptiness. Emptiness exists because it can be directly realized by consciousness. The process of moving toward a direct realization of emptiness occurs gradually through logical, reliable means of cognition. And of course, first, it starts with a correct conceptual understanding of what emptiness is referring to, which is, we've been working on that. With the first direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness, and then by continuing to meditate and familiarize oneself with that realization, that's called the path of meditation, if you recall the 5 paths, familiarizing yourself with that realization. Nirvana is automatically and spontaneously revealed in one's consciousness. This is what we're told by the yogi meditators who have done this. It's automatically and spontaneously revealed in one's consciousness. This is because the mistaken view of inherent existence, something that actually never existed, is extinguished in the consciousness. The view is extinguished in the consciousness. This refutes the belief in the conceptual idea of independent, inherent self-existence. And because of this, Prasangikas reject the idea of inherent existence and do not fall into the extreme of nihilism. Woohoo! We finished everything. It's been a while, and it's 12:29. I bet you all are just filled with questions, right? Like, what did he read? Anyway,
Just
it's stuff to think about.
realizing that it's important to distinguish between the two definitions of cessation, the one that's mistaken, meaning lights out
Lights
of
out, right.
consciousness,
Right.
and the prasangika, the
Right.
lineage we are part of, cessation refers to the cessation of grasping, clinging, craving.
At inherent
Affliction,
existence.
yeah.
The grasping is always that inherent existence. So it's an inherent craving.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
an
yeah.
inherent, that thing out there that you're craving really truly exists that way. And we don't actually realize we're giving it all the meaning that it has. Our consciousness is giving it all the meaning that it has for us. But that's a long way off for us. It really is. But it's good to understand that that's where we're headed. Okay. Since we're right at closing time, how about some closing prayers?
how lucky we are to have the companionship of not only ourselves in this human form, but all the friends and fellow aspiring altruistic bodhisattvas throughout the universes. We are holding on to this aspiration and intention and motivation as we move through our daily activities, always motivated by altruism, always motivated by our wish to become ever more wise, insightful, and enlightened. So we say the prayer to generate and maintain bodhicitta. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And may the view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. And may that born increase and deepen and expand forevermore. And then we remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama and do a brief prayer, remembering that he is the inspiration for all of our teachers in this lifetime right now on the planet. He's inspiring millions and millions of people to maintain this altruistic approach to existence. In the snow, and the prayer goes like this, it's in the sheet. In snowy mountain paradise, you are the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig, that's his name, may you remain until samsara ends. And then very important to refresh our commitment, desire, and intention to always meet with the teachings and find qualified masters to keep us on this great path. In all my lifetimes, never separated from the perfect Dharma. Let me read it so that I get it.
Perfect guru,
Right.
the spiritual master.
In all my lifetimes, may I never be separated from perfect spiritual masters and enjoy the magnificent Dharma. Completing all the virtues of levels and paths, may I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara, the primordial Buddha.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy that you are all continuing to come. It makes a huge difference to Kavita and I. We feel like we're not just whistling in the dark here. And it's great. And I love to have your whenever you have input, I love to hear it because it only helps. It only helps us clarify, this information, which is so important and can be so helpful. Okay, so with that, thank you, everybody, and we'll.
Thank you, Christopher.
Oh, you're so
Thanks,
welcome.
Christopher.
So welcome. So we'll see you all next time. Bye.